Chapter 7: The German Workers' Party and Work in Pro-Fatherland Units. To understand what follows, it is necessary for me to write briefly about my own political activities beyond the framework of my military service. Soon after my arrival in Munich in 1919, I had joined the German National People's Party of Bavaria and spoke at election meetings. It was then without doubt that the party which spoke most strongly for the national interest. Many things about it did not please me, however, and therefore I engaged in a stimulating correspondence with the party's Bavarian secretary. The meetings in particular disappointed me. Certainly there were speakers to whom I agreed unreservedly, but the audience was not the one I wished to find there. Bavarians from all walks of life. The supporters were drawn instead too narrowly from the intellectual upper classes, officers, government officials, university lecturers, and a large number of women. One day, a friend took me to a meeting of the German Workers' Party in the Deutsches Reich Tavern. Drexler, referring to Anton Drexler, was the chairman. Feder, referring to Gottfried Feder, the speaker. So impressed was I that I joined the party immediately. My membership number was below 70. The DAP had a short but momentous history behind it. I shall describe it briefly here, but it was decisive for my followers, and may also not be generally known. The movement was born on 7 March 1918. That day, a number of factory workers in Munich organized a work committee for a just peace in order to make the German worker aware of the intentions of the enemy powers to destroy Germany and expose war profiteering and racketeering. 26 brave German workers fought this forlorn battle without any financial help, derided and ridiculed by their own work colleagues. The public meeting was held in October 1918 in the Wagner Hall under Drexler's chairmanship, and was quite successful. Immediately after the Red Revolution, these German men formed a small circle to investigate the causes and effects of the revolution and to throw light on the destructive machinations of the Jews. On 5 January 1919, the workers formed the German Workers' Party and elected Drexler its first chairman. Anton Drexler was a simple man, employed by day at a bench in the main workshops of the state railway, a gentleman amongst manual laborers. He sacrificed every free hour to the welfare of the Volk as a whole, and especially those of his own social status. Without the financial support of wealthy donors dependent on the meager dues of the membership, he worked indefatigably to make known the aims and beliefs of the DAP. As time went on, the venues for meetings held too few. Dietrich Eckart, Gottfried Feder, Adolf Hitler, and Hermann Esser joined the DAP and became orators. I hardly missed a meeting and introduced all my Reichswehr friends to the DAP. Thus, we laid the foundation stones on which the young movement was erected. On 24 February 1920, at a mass meeting in the Hofbrauhaus, the party presented the 25 points of its program for the first time to the public. From that day on, its numbers began to increase substantially, so that the meetings were moved to the Kindelkeller, and from there to the Circus Kron. On 29 July 1921, after winning an internal party struggle, Adolf Hitler was elected the first chairman of the renamed Nationalsozialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the NSDAP. My personal interest was in the NSDAP stormtroops, the Sturmabteilung, or SA. At Hitler's request, Naval Captain Ehrhardt placed at its disposal as organizational leaders a number of officers of his brigade. Lieutenant Clinch organized and led the stormtroops, who showed their mettle and courage at numerous political gatherings. After his brigade was disbanded, Ehrhardt set up his HQ in Munich. Therefore, I had frequent opportunities to meet with the well-known Freikorps commander. Chief of Staff was Lieutenant Commander Hoffmann. Dr. Hanke, alias Schnitzler, was a political advisor, a clever man with a turbulent past and troubled future. He extended the threads of his political web into Bavarian political circles and established a close relationship with Privy Councillor Dr. Heim. This support was naturally of major significance for Ehrhardt's say and effectiveness in Bavaria. Lieutenant Commander von Killinger, a tireless old campaigner, Lieutenant Commander Kauter, Lieutenant Liedisch, von Bühlwitz, and Heinrich were on his staff. A large part of the academic youth of Bavaria and Munich had joined Brigade Ehrhardt, as they did the later organizational council. Without doubt, OC as a military training organization was one of the best armed units. Ehrhardt also had a large following in other university activities. In the Freikorps and later the Bund Oberland, Captain Römer had created an organization which extended across Bavaria and had won acceptance from all levels of society. It acted in the Ruhr in 1920 and fought in Upper Silesia in 1921, notably at the siege of Annaberg, where Captain Ossleicher won fame for himself. The volunteer units which had participated in the Kap coup and in the Ruhr were originally a close copy of the Reichswehr. The units were merged later under Colonel von Lenz. In northern Bavaria, Captain Heiss had set up his own at Nuremberg called Reichsflagge, whose organization and compactness were superior to most of the other groups. When, in the spring of 1919, contrary to the practice in Munich, the Revolutionary Republic was opposed in northern Bavaria. It was solely and exclusively due to this officers' battalion that Nuremberg held out. Evinger and Schneppenhorst, representatives of the so-called Command HQ, did not dare to intervene to prevent him. Dietrich Eckhardt introduced me to Heiss in Munich. We were not only good friends, but I set up a close work alliance with both him and Major Hans-Georg Hoffmann in Passau. I attended many meetings of the Reichsflagge and accompanied Heiss on his recruiting drives through Franconia. One day he invited me to a Reichsflagge venue in Munich to persuade me to found a Reichsflagge group for the city. I was very reluctant to take this on because of my current heavy workload. Only after a long tussle did I eventually give in. Once I had created a small following and saw their loyal devotion, I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. Much earlier, a circle of like-minded colleagues, almost exclusively Reichswehr and former Imperial Army comrades, had joined forces with me under the black, white, red flag. We met in large coffee houses, wore black, white, red badges, and saw it as one of our duties to convert the restaurants we visited to our way of thinking. When we struck up the Flaggenlied, all the guests joined in enthusiastically. We helped those of other leanings to get into the mood too. Most loyal to the flag was Captain Zadel. I had been his good friend at the War Academy. We met up often on occasions, and early in the war, since his regiment, 3rd Prince Leopold Field Artillery Regiment, was in the same corps as mine. Throughout the war, as the chairman of the Officers' Legion wrote of him, he was used constantly and only at the front. After the war, our identical political outlook brought us together again, and we became inseparable friends. Zadel is one of those men who belong in a uniform, never in a suit. Of other comrades, Major Furhofer, the well-known commander of the Heavy Artillery Iron Battalion, Captain Regler, Major Vagus, and Fane, Captain Weiss, and my school friend Trutter, who were always on hand. To celebrate the birthday of the former Kaiser on 22 January 1922, I summoned the Reichsflagge and its adherents to Vita's wine bar in Berestade. An extraordinarily large number of guests attended. The Münchener Post reported sarcastically a screened circle of white-blue Reichswehr officers at their head, General von Epp, held a patriotic union without the ladies. The 1812 League of Paragons of Virtue had bread and water. The white-blue troop of men of honor held their social gathering in specially reserved elegant saloons. Also with the party were the retired police president and political kingmaker and member of the Bavarian Supreme Court, Ernst Ponner, the alleged separatist Pittinger, expert in military organization, the Honorable Stempel, questionable professor and field provost of the great Bavarian army, etc., etc. This nonsense concealed the fact that the presence of almost all OC officers in Munich proved this was no white-blue Bavarian celebration, but black-white bread. From the friendly dedication, we could draw the satisfaction that our small community had been noticed. We were founding together with the OC. The Munich branch of the National Association of German Officers. From the rule book, which I prepared as a provisional document, the first 3 articles read: Number 1, the NDO is a Volkisch body of military officers who uphold the great traditions of the Royal Bavarian Army, remain loyal to the princes of the royal house, and wish to devote all their energies to the cleansing and renewal of the German Volk and fatherland. 2, the NDO will hold aloft in its membership the justified caste consciousness of the officer, true pride in the imperishable achievements of the officer corps in the Great War, and the high calling of the officer, leader, and educator of the Volk in arms. 3. The NDO rejects outright spiritless self-conceit and see it as the officer's most important task to work and fight shoulder to shoulder for the liberation of Germany with all compatriots in the Volk without reference to their status or calling. I cite these 3 initial articles of the rule book here because they express in brief what I see as the duty of the officer in the post-1918 state. At my suggestion, Major Fane took over the chair of the NDO. Under his leadership, the organization grew to an imposing size. It, if later failed to live up to the expectations of its founders, the reason lay in the failed attempts by Fane to force youth into the mindset of the older generation. Fane, colonial warrior and prisoner of war, also lacked the heart-stirring and sweeping experience of the frontline storm troops and infantry on the Western Front. In today's German Volk, there are 3 generations. The elder, which can still remember 1866 and 1870. The present one, which embodies the Great War experience, and the young one, too young to have fought. In other words, the generals, the front soldiers, and the recruits. All have a special role to play in the struggle for the renewal of the fatherland. Just as the recruits must understand back until finishing their education, the generals must protect and make known the spirit of the old army. No soldier will fail to pay them due respect. For their part, They must not forget that they are the protectors of the spirit of the officer and soldier created by Frederick the Great and Wilhelm I. The 27 Bavarian generals who later threw out General Ludendorff and the rest who did nothing to stop it have failed to prove their worth in the effort to preserve this legacy. Moreover, they opened a chasm which is almost impossible to bridge. General, fighting soldier, and recruit must combine, but maintain the division between themselves. The old ways go, times change, and new life blooms from within the ruins. There was a Bavarian army, and there was a Prussian army. The war recorded their glories for all time in the ledgers of history. From the Great War and chaos, a rejuvenated German army must arise. Our fathers and grandfathers were Bavarians first, and then Germans. We and our descendants should be, and will be, first and foremost, Germans. Chapter 8. General von Epp's helpers. Now it is not the time to describe in detail the story of the structure I set up and led as a staff officer to Colonel von Epp. The structure is completed, but its history must remain a closed book until later. I shall merely say that the work would have been impossible and fruitless were it not for my good fortune to have as commanding officer a man who combined his ability and knowledge with a passionate love for the fatherland and the courage to accept responsibility without regard for the consequences. Colonel von Epp had received that rank from His Majesty the King of Bavaria. The handwritten document signed by Eber, by which the Republic appointed him general, he accepted with mixed feelings. Bavaria owes this brave officer its salvation from the chaos of the Soviet councils, a fact which is naturally not recounted with much pleasure. When events turned ugly and he risked his life, people were happy with him and put up with him, if reluctantly. Once he had overcome the danger, he had to vacate his seat for others. One fights for the objective. Others benefit from the results. Those who fought for peace and order in Germany and consolidated this republic languish today in the shadows or are slandered and pursued by the current protectors of the republic, who now repose on the sofa where previously they bided their time. Freikorps officers can take up the tale from here. On numerous occasions they urged to act, and those who watched them from a window as they liberated Munich fill their shoes by setting up the Freikorps, which had its baptism of fire in the fighting for Munich and in the Ruhr. General von Epp successfully laid the foundations for the Bavarian Reichswehr. Besides training and consolidating the organization, his concern over the years to come would be to obtain weapons and armor. He passes to me to work on, indicating the important points. A number of young pro-fatherland officers, happy to be delegated the responsibility, made themselves available. With their help, I was able to create a project which had real significance from the narrow framework of the Bavarian Reichswehr, and was moreover to gain decisive influence for the destiny of Bavaria. Dr. Schetter is chairman of the secret Reichstag tribunal, which gave me 10 days at Stadelheim for insulting Dr. Paul Levy, Reichstag deputy. Following his response to my inquiry, stenographic note reporting on the 24th session of the 27th Secret Committee of 11 October 1926, page 11. That the events of those years are no longer under an embargo to secrecy, I shall lift the veil from certain events at an appropriate time. To make full use of the liberty Dr. Schetter gave me is not possible at present. The documents have been filed to await later publication. Pro-fatherland men, mainly in the countryside, but also within the walls of Munich city itself, took on the job of hoarding weapons and other materials of war, which the army was obliged to surrender under the terms of the enemy alliance. The Reich Law for the disarmament of the population in 1920 struck the first blow against this activity. Anybody who failed to inform the authorities of the locations of secret weapons dumps faced up to 5 years imprisonment. Most were not intimidated by this legislation and ignored it, although some consider it prudent to evacuate existing dumps and relocate the material elsewhere. Because of the penalties, it was naturally very difficult to find new hiding places. Additionally, those in Berlin felt the need to get involved in winkling out the Bavarian weapon stores, and they were not alone. The state leadership of the Bavarian militia was required by the disarmament law to collect and brand their weapons and surrender any excess items to the reception centers of the Reich and Entente Disarmament Commission. After the Spa Treaty, the Inter-Allied Military Control Commission became more active. The Reichswehr, whose reconstruction had been led by General von Seeckt since the Kapp Revolt of March 1920, was now monitored by a set of enemy surveillance organs. In addition to this monitoring, the difficulties in creating a useful force grew substantially and were not overcome uniformly by all centers. Traitors and scoundrels proved very destructive. The situation is perhaps best shown if I quote an extract of a document submitted to my commanding officer in October 1920. Response: monitoring of the Army by the Entente Commission. The enemy is within. The IMCC, which is maintained at our own expense within the cities, keeps official watch to ensure that the harsh and dishonorable terms of the Versailles Treaty, to which the government of the German Reich subordinated itself again in Spa, are ruthlessly enforced. To the mockery of all the optimists and pacifists, their real goal, towards which they proceed with iron logic, is that our small professional army, in which they still fear the spirit of the great victorious army, should collapse. On this fact, we must be completely clear. Since the armistice, a battle-worthy fighting force has been created by determined pro-fatherland officers and soldiers from the ruins of the old army. Spiting the powers, men who take joy in responsibility must continue to maintain and consolidate the personnel, materials of the new army. Officers who are unwilling to devote their entire being to this goal and who see the Reichswehr as only an economic institution have no place with us and must disappear. At a time when every word and every document is exposed to foreign snoopers, officers must not await orders to act. Under the current circumstances, many orders simply cannot be given, which obviously would have been given pre-war and during the war. Under the coercion, the peace treaty, many orders will be given which our enemy dictates. I must request today for the commanding officer the freedom to judge individual cases in that light. On 1 January 1921, the German army was reduced from 200,000 men to half that figure. An enormous organizational effort was required from all command centers, general staff officers, and adjutants in order to achieve the cuts without too much damage and hardship. Officers and men would be put on the street because it suited the enemy and because the German negotiators did not have the stamina to resist to the last. In vain, friends of the fatherland hoped to hear the governments of Germany say no just once. It never did. The Greek chronicler Thucydides once said, "The reason why the Persians were always slaves and always will be is that they could never say no." When will the Germans say no to the world that Germany is not prepared to follow the fate of the Persians? The reduction in the standing army naturally extended to weapons and equipment. On January 1st, 1921, General von Epp personally became infantry leader in the Bavarian military district. He now controlled the 3 infantry regiments, 12 battalions, and 7th Engineer Battalion. And from this point on, his activity extended to all infantry depots across Bavaria. The surrender of weapons linked to the reduction of the standing army was handled in collaboration with the Reich Trust Association. In this way, I got to know Captain Winter, a pro-fatherland German, whom, far from the eyes and ears of the public, I fought a tough battle with the Entente and its local-born lackeys. This did not bring things to a halt. The ultimatum of the Entente forced the Reich Army to keep cutting back on its equipment. 6 fortified locations in the east were deprived of all their armaments. A special plan disarmed Königsberg. The IMCC had special plans for the fitting out of all units. A note from General Nonek on 12 May 1921 urged all forces to spare no effort to keep the irreplaceable property of the Volk from being destroyed by the enemy. Once machine pistols had been seized, as a final measure to ease the worries of the victorious Allies, they turned their attentions primarily to equipment and vehicles. We made a special effort to save the valuable optical equipment, but even here little could be done. It is obvious that the resistance to all this throughout Germany displeased the organs of the Entente. Without the silent tolerance and help of the Entente officers, who as chivalrous men understood our position and respected us for our opposition to them, there would probably have been frequent incidents. In particular, a number of Italian representatives and also many British officers performed their office with dignity and tact. I must mention here Italian Major Grammaccini as a model of the chivalrous opponent. From time to time, at particular locations, successful resistance work had been achieved. Infuriated notes would travel from the IMCC chairman in Munich, General Pagliari, to the head of the German liaison office. In a letter of 30 June 1921, he lamented that during an inventory of the scrap heap to which the 19th Infantry Regiment was supposed to deliver its weapons, it was established that scarcely the smallest part of the weapons reported surrendered could be reconciled with the scrap. There was no shortage of treachery, but many reports from stool pigeons and German gentlemen betraying the weapon stores to the Entente were diverted to our own supervisory organs. Many excellent citizens, wanting to unburden their knowledge, did so to an impostor, and instead of the expected reward in cash, got their deserts behind the prison wall. Now was not the time to tell the world of a man who used his ability to watch over the welfare of the fatherland, while the brave bourgeois enjoyed the carefree sleep of the just. It would seem that a number of noble men who betrayed the weapon stores to the Entente were killed. Femme-mort, political murder, is a term for it. One day, a concerned citizen went to see Police President Porner and told him, "Herr President, there are a number of organizations." "Ja, he replied, "but far too few of them." In the New Germany, it is significant that after about 6 years of a secret Reichstag tribunal committee was set up for the purpose of hunting down those who had committed murder from a political motive based on a sense of national justice. In the end, some men were brought to account and received prison sentences or were executed. General von Epp called before the tribunal on 11 October 1926, as a witness, had no compunction about calling the tribunal by an appropriate name, and nor did I. A general a great idea, whose advocates and fighters are ready to risk their lives for it, is bound to lead to bloodshed on both sides. Party bosses whose business is politics will naturally not understand that their battle cry is not blood but gold. The above-mentioned liaison center of the party Army Peace Commission was led by Major Vogel. He was formerly an officer of the staff command of Colonel von Epp, and the right man for this difficult post. He forgave nothing, fought with everything he had for the German interest, and even managed to earn himself the respect of the Entente by doing so. He played a leading role in saving weapons and material for the army, as did the Munich Police Authority in the struggle to prevent treachery. In 1921, German volunteers, amongst them the Bavarian Freikorps Oberland, were called to arms in the defense of Upper Silesia against Polish insurgents and overwhelmed them. Many wagon loads of guns rolled from Bavaria to the disputed areas. In Munich itself, special stocks of war materials were held available on call for the leaders of the civil defense. To my pride, though only awarded from afar, my help was recognized by the award of the Silesian Eagle. The 3 Bavarian ordnance depots at Bamberg, Munich, and Ingolstadt fell victim to the Entente on 15 June 1921, the personnel either being given notice of termination or being discharged at once. The Bavarian military district was obliged to use the depot at Kassel, to where a proportion of the Bavarian stock was transferred. The rest had been given up for destruction. In late June, I accompanied General von Epp to Ingolstadt. I visited the ordnance department there. I found a perfectly equipped organization and a recently established office in the workshops. Even after a transfer of most of the stock to Kassel and the surrender of the remainder to the RTG, there still remained material valued at 20 to 25 million Reichsmarks. The fate of many officers' lower grade officials, motor sergeants and armorers with up to 27 years service, who had to give up their life's work, and about 300 selected and able workers, some of them who had been decades in the trade, was particularly harsh. Here it was necessary to act at once. We heard the same story in Bamberg and Munich. General von Epp agreed to the proposals I made for averting great harm. The leaders of the Bavarian militia and government helped in the realization of this aim. Above all, I would like to mention the following men who worked loyally with me in the major task from beginning to end: Major Faber, Paymaster Rubenauer, and Lieutenant Solcher of the 19th Infantry Regiment, and outside Munich in exemplary devotion to duty, especially Lieutenant Munst in Swabia, and Senior Armorer Zimmerer at Chamgau. In Munich, I had set up a comprehensive equipment compound from which much useful material, especially vehicles, harnesses, and stable gear, could be shipped out to the countryside. Ironically, I extensively re-equipped the mounted police with horses and harness. Their commander expressed official gratitude in 2 letters. Even more grateful were the mounted officers themselves, who shared out the excess amongst my friends and adherents in November 1923 and on 1 April 1924. Meanwhile, the Bavarian militia had become a powerful entity, and already in 1920 was a decisive power factor in Bavarian politics. Forestry Commissioner Esserich, Foreign Organization Eslich in Germany proper, extended south into Austria, especially the Tyrol, with Organization Kanzler, Senior Survey Kanzler, who had made a name for himself organizing in the Chiemgau, and then stood at Esserich's side, as military governor, deserves special recognition for building up the resistance movement. On the staff of the state authorities, along with the skill of Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, Captain Schenk, formerly of the 2nd Infantry Regiment, headed the intelligence and the press division with Captain Seidel. Dr. Müller headed the legal branch, assisted by Dr. Gutmann of the state authority as legal advisor and corporation counsel. At the head of the Munich militia was City Governor Kühner, supported by his adjutant, Major Fuchs. In the autumn of 1920, the militia showed its strength by rallies and even regional shooting contests, one of the latter held by the Bavarian militia authorities in Munich on 20 December 1920. Was designed to show the whole world the unshakable resolve of the Bavarian government and Volk to defend themselves by force of arms against all enemies. This was the primary purpose of the oratory aimed at the masses. Then followed the gesture of an oath when 100,000 volunteer warriors raised their weapons in the sky. But the political leaders would always shrink back and lock the Bavarian lion back in his cage. Just as their courage had failed those men who held the destiny of Bavaria in their hands on 13 March 1920, when Bavaria failed Kapp, the man who could have changed decisively Germany, not Bavaria's, future. When a short time after the great fanfare of the Königsplatz in Munich, Berlin had called for an end to the proud answer was, leaders, stand down, disband the militia. Carr and Escherich, who had demanded the oath of the 100,000-man force and had pledged them their word, went along with the disbanding Deputy Dr. Held, requested in the name of the coalition parties that the militia disband voluntarily to halt the Carr ministry. At the end of May 1920, the leaders of the military district and Gau militia met and surrendered to the parliamentarians with 2 exceptions, Pinniger and Lenz. At the same time, those very people who had once fallen over themselves with enthusiasm for the militia now realized how unintelligent and politically unsound the militia had been, particularly on 26 December. Courageously and filled with the spirit of self-sacrifice, the militia now dissolved as quickly as possible to stop Carr. Truly a battle objective of astounding significance. Escherich stepped down. It is easy to understand why Carr followed a few weeks later. They were not defeated because they did not fight. They dared not fight, but capitulated at once, for political reasons, naturally. Terrible things would otherwise have come to Germany. Wise politicians stated with a solemn air the middle classes cringed and trembled with fear. Dietrich Eckart once put it so well, the cross-section of non-Jewish people is Carr. Think about this. Seldom have the statesmen of a province been given so many opportunities to tip the scales for Germany by throwing the weight and strength of the state into the balance as did the post-revolutionary leaders of Bavaria. They never did their mission justice. The fighters for Volk and fatherland offered themselves again and again to the pro-national Bavarian government, which rejected them constantly. The struggle against Berlin, better put, the struggle for Berlin, could have ahead of at any time under the black, white, red flag been the pro-national Bavarian Volkspartei did not want. Unitarianism and Berlin industry are mere catchphrases and bluster. My goodness. Okay. We're just taking a look here at everything that we got. This is going to be this is a... Ooh. Okay. I tell you what, we're going to break this chapter into two because this is. Okay. We're on page 51. This goes until page 76. So I tell you what, let's get to, and I'm going to let me get a pencil right quick here. Let me get through this page right here that I was on, page 50, and I'm going to make a line. Let me do that right quick here. Okay. I'm drawing a line right after the first paragraph on page 51. Let's get through that page, and I think we're going to call it good. Ooh, lordy. I should have double-checked that. Yeah, that is a lot. There's a lot of information here. A lot of stuff. Okay. So let's try to get through this a little bit here. Okay. Catchphrases and bluster. Autonomy of individual states and federalism are yesterday's terms, thanks to the courageous collaboration of the autonomous, federalist, Bavarian state rulers. A successful resistance to Berlin was always possible if only it had been desired in earnest. Today, the only argument which counts is the money bag. The advocates of the unified state want it because it is more economical. Its opponents are against it because they will forfeit influential and lucrative posts. The German state of the future must be built by those who fought for it militarily. With their help, state builders such as those Prussia once gave to the German fatherland would construct and organize the Third Reich. How this state of today is being formed or misshapen seems fairly important for the future of German. Okay, give me a minute, folks. All right, folks. Let's go ahead and soldier on here, as they say. Okay. How this state of today is being formed and misshapen seems fairly important for the future of Germany. In 1921, things were different. The warriors stood ready. It is tragic that Bavaria did not avail itself of them. An error which it will not be acquitted by history. Is it any wonder, therefore, when a dyed-in-the-wool, German-feeling Bavarian patriot like President Punner, whose merits as a statement for Bavaria can certainly never be disputed, exclaims in anger after so many disappointments, "I don't give a damn anymore for Bavaria." Similarly, before the war, one of Bavaria's highly meritorious war ministers, who enjoyed the grace and favor of His Majesty, expressed his displeasure. Thus, we, Bavarians, are so lucky to have the Tyroleans as neighbors, meaning that the Austrians, like the Bavarians, despite all their good qualities, seem to have failed to take a lead in politics. This painful realization will not depress the Bavarian who loves his homeland, even when he thinks of the endless string of wasted opportunities which its rulers could have pressed into the hands of the German government. The militia was sacrificed on 21 December 1921. Karl resigned as president of Bavaria, and Graf von Lerchenfeld replaced him. Escherich, not gutless, even if Karl was primarily responsible, went into the shadows. Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, whose superior organizational skills and tireless endeavor were mainly responsible for the growth of the militia, withdrew, disappointed and embittered. Thus, it was to General Epp, the advocate of the militia, and Dr. Müller, of the militia staff to whom the discouraged and leaderless force, disbanded and in a state of collapse, looked for moral support. Health Commissioner Dr. Pinninger, militia district leader in Regensburg, appeared to Escherich to be the man to take over the leadership of the dispersed militia forces, and he transferred leadership into Pinninger's loyal hands, supported by Dr. Müller, assisted by former Regensburg Command Chief of Staff Lieutenant Colonel Schmidt and Lieutenant Colonel Schad. Pinninger set up a new organization. He succeeded in obtaining the necessary funds, and after a string of talks and conferences, attended mainly by Epp and myself as advisors and occasionally Poner and Carr, a new militia was set up and known later as Bund Bayern und Reich. The majority of the former Bavarian military leaders joined it, trusting in the names Epp, Poner, and Carr. Only a few districts remain with Escherich. And there, ladies and gentlemen, at about the 46-minute mark, we are going to end this session. Part 5. We will finish up Chapter 9, and we will go as far as we can here. Let me take a look right quick here at Chapter 9. Chapter 9, I mentioned it has a lot of stuff because it is at General Staff, 7th Division, the invasion of the Ruhr. So there's going to be a lot of information. Oh, yes. Okay. Not too much, about 9 pages. So not too bad. Let's look at Chapter 10 right quick. Chapter 10. This also has the pictures section. So right in the middle of the book, or the plates as they would call them. Not too bad. Okay. German Fighting Federation. Okay. We're just kind of getting an idea here. So, not too bad. So, we're on page 51. And we're going to have to chew through about roughly 20, 25 pages. Oh, well. I mean, if we want to get real and retentive, about 24 and 3/4 pages. So not too bad. Not too bad. Or 24 and 3/4 pages. Excuse me. So not too bad. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. And we will continue on with this work tomorrow. Until then, have a good night.